Okay, I think we are officially live. I see a little button at the top that says live, so we should probably kick off. It is very nice to meet everybody today. Thank you all for joining the session. I'm JP. I'm the host for today. It's very nice to welcome you all here. This is a webinar being hosted by CFO Connect, which many of you know. It's a global community of over 12,000 finance leaders dedicated to help you accelerate your career, expand your network, and tackle today's toughest finance challenges. So today we're really excited to dive into a discussion around how AI companies are experiencing meteoric growth and what you finance leaders can really learn from all of these examples. Today's in partnership with Stripe. Very excited to have Steve here from the team. They're sharing some exclusive data. So get it here first, I guess, really around how AI companies are scaling very much compared to traditional business models. So maybe just kicking things off, I think for the first couple of minutes, what we'll do is just roundtable introductions. We've got some really big guests here from various parts of the ecosystem who are going to lend their expertise. So maybe I will just give a very quick introduction to myself, and then I'll hand it off to perhaps Steve, and then we can go from there. So as I said, I'm JP. That's what most people call me. I'm managing partner of a new fund called Defiant. I've been investing in early stage. I'm managing partner. We're a new fund. I've been investing for over a decade in early stage software and fintech businesses. I've been very lucky to work with 9 unicorns over my time, some of which you're familiar to the audience. Companies like Wise, Marqeta, TravelPerk, Pigment, Forta, Juni, Ledger, and several others along the way. I've always been very passionate about software and fintech, and AI is very much the topic of the day for us venture community. So excited to be here, and thank you for making it. Maybe Steve, if you want to kick off, and then we can do John and Paul.
Yeah, sure. So hi all, Steve Horrex. I am the finance director for Stripe in EMEA. Previously spent about 4 or 5 years at Amazon as well. So spending my time based in the US tech world, but based in London. So representing Stripe from an EMEA lens. And yeah, I guess in relation to this topic, we're sort of generally seeing that a lot of these emergent AI companies are building fundamentally on Stripe. So we're going to give visibility into sort of how those particular users are performing. And obviously we're very actively leveraging the technology ourselves internally. So should I pull it over to Jonathan? Go ahead.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, I'm Jonathan, co-founder and CEO of Light. We basically built a modern ERP for fast-growing scale-ups across the US and Europe, and previously been part of a couple of fast-growing companies where we were left without much choice in the area of ERP. And yes, we have a very good integration as well with Stripe. And as we'll talk about later, some of these like new fast-growing companies, a lot of transaction volume in that area. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you. Paul from Berlin, but based in London. I'm the CFO and COO of Autone. We're a B2B SaaS startup, and we're using AI to help our customers, fashion brands, to optimize their inventory decisions. So we would tell a Cavalli or a Chloe what t-shirts to buy, and which color, what size, and where to place them globally in their store network, so that they reduce waste and overstock and boost profits.
Wonderful. Thanks, guys. Thank you all for making it. So as the title of today's session alludes to, we're here to talk about AI companies and their rapid growth. I think you look anywhere in the news, anywhere in the media, we're all seeing crazy headlines, companies hitting 100 million, 500 million of ARR faster than ever before. You know, even today, we just saw the news, Lovable raising a new funding round, Cursor hitting crazy heights. It's definitely an interesting time to be in the market. I think we're all excited. The nice thing is it's a new technology. There's lots of stuff to think about, lots of stuff to talk about. One of the things that we're all kind of asking ourselves in venture land anyways, why are these companies growing faster and what's really happening? Maybe just to give our little bit of a background, and then we can dig into some of the more expert opinions on the panel. But we really think there are 2 interesting trends at play here. I think number one is just this market perception around the AI hype cycle a little bit, where it's an arms race and everybody is scrambling to keep up and use these technologies. We're seeing a lot of pressure from actually top down. So C-suites having some mandate that they need to use, they need to embrace AI, and that's sort of getting pushed through organizations, which is quite different. We're also seeing, funny enough, bottoms up motion at the same time, where we have a lot of people who are experimenting with these technologies, seeing real, genuine value immediately in their everyday, day-to-day lives, and they're demanding the products as well. So I think there's this combination of top down, bottom up, and it's a very interesting time to be in this market. So I'm going to hand over the first question to Steve, and I'm going to ask you, Steve, so what sort of revenue patterns tied into that and growth patterns are you seeing across some of the AI companies on Stripe's platform?
Yeah, sure. And I think It's been an interesting one sort of being in Stripe during this time. We obviously had the COVID-driven boom a few years back, obviously lots of venture capital funding feeding into startups that drove an acceleration into Stripe's performance and what we saw as volume. And now we're always seeing a round two of that coming through now with this sort of Stripe, this AI boom that's coming in. So yeah, we did a sort of a piece of analysis on the top AI companies by revenue on our platform, and actually kind of mind-blowing results in this really. So AI companies aren't just sort of growing fast. They're kind of rewriting that sort of startup playbook in many ways. So comparing similar cohorts versus, say, a SaaS company cohort from a few years prior, we're generally seeing that the top 100 AI companies processing on Stripe's platform are reaching 5 million revenue in 24 months only. So that's compared to about 37 months when you look at that sort of previous cohort of just sort of SaaS startups. And they're actually they're growing about 3 times faster than startups formed prior to 2020. So much quicker to ramp up, in many ways sort of going global much quicker. You've mentioned a couple of these companies already, but Cursor went to about 100 million in ARR in their first 3 years. They're now sort of past 500 million in ARR. I think Lovable reported about 50 million in ARR and millions of users just sort of 6 months after they GA'd. Bolt at 20 million ARR in just sort of 2 months. There's articles this morning about Anthropic hitting 4 billion in ARR as well. I think about 2 months ago, they were talking about 3 billion in ARR. I've got contacts working there are saying FP&A, there's a nightmare planning, budgeting and et cetera. They're going through budgets for 2 months after they've written them. So yeah, huge challenges for them at the moment in being able to plan where the business is going just because of the hype around it. So yeah, I guess pushing that back to you, JP, how do you evaluate whether that rapid growth is really sustainable versus just the hype that's pushing it?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's funny. I think Lovable's already encroaching on 100 million, the latest rumors in the market that I've heard. So it just shows how even a couple of weeks later, these sorts of data points are just getting refreshed at the alarming rate, right? But yeah, I guess the question is like, how do we think about sustainability in this market? And I think it's really tough from an investor's perspective. It's very hard to ascertain where this industry levels out and what the steady state we're going to reach in the next couple of years. I think most of the investors in the ecosystem feel like we're in a little bit of a bubble territory. I think valuations are really high across the boards. A lot of the companies we're seeing raising at very high numbers with very little revenue early on. If you look at the Silicon Valley, I'm sure you've seen many cases of AI businesses raising at unicorn valuations with 3 people in the founding team, stuff like that. I don't think is super sustainable. But if you take those sorts of edge cases aside, when we're spending time in this ecosystem, we're really focusing on aspects of long-term defensibility. Like, how do we find companies and how do we look for companies that have true moats? A moat today, I think, is being not quite watered down. That's not the right analogy, but perhaps drying up. Things that used to proprietary data, proprietary tech is becoming more and more available. We do think a lot about distribution as a superpower and as a form of defensibility. I think that's very, very important. We do really value context and domain-specific knowledge. We also think that's very important. We really like founders who have, we kind of say, lived-in experience. So they've seen a problem at the coalface and they use that proprietary knowledge to build software. We think some of those are the loops that we're focusing on these days. But for sure, I don't think there's an easy answer into like how sustainable do we think this is and what's the direction of travel. Maybe back to you, Steve, a question around monetization. It's something that a few people are curious about and have asked about, how are you seeing essentially monetization being implemented these days in AI businesses?
Yeah, so I think obviously we're all familiar with traditional SaaS-based subscription models. Always probably still make sense for AI tools. We're increasingly seeing companies playing around, investigating, trying alternative monetization models, and also how they're defining and measuring value there in customers. So you've got usage-based billing pricing model with a number of people looking at where charges reflect time, data, API calls. You can keep your prices therefore aligned in many ways with your cost of providing an AI service, which is obviously highly cloud-based driven, sort of driven by API calls. It also in many ways lowers that sort of barrier to entry for customers because actually they can be small users or very high users. It's all volume driven. And then actually some others are now looking at sort of outcome-based pricing. So it's actually sort of tied directly to results, maybe less so to your cost. There's a risk in doing that, obviously. But say Intercom, as an example, they price their AI support agent in based on resolutions, not actually on tickets, so entirely outcome-based. And therefore the customer sees the value ultimately in what they're paying for that by getting that outcome when they do it. So I think Spin's now on its way to about 100 million run rate business in just under 2 years now, and actually ultimately helping Intercom as a total company transform its trajectory and its growth rate. And in many ways, that's innovative pricing is supporting it. So this is fundamentally why Stripe has built our billing platform for this new reality. We're building specifically sort of usage-based billing. We're building out sort of means to support these businesses in however they want to price their AI products or other products that are built off of an AI support model. Fundamentally, a lot of these legacy systems, particularly billing, often being developed in-house, often legacy, full of tech debt. It's ended up being a growth barrier rather than an enabler. So obviously we're building out Stripe Billing now to be sort of natively integrated with Stripe Payments. That's this comprehensive platform now for revenue optimization. So yeah, proven results. We think at the moment, we've got a lot of the largest AI companies leveraging it now to build their end customers. And so I think that it's still going to probably evolve over time. I think as AI businesses continue to experiment in this space and how they want to build, but yeah, we'll continue to be this.
Very cool. Helpful. I'm sure many of our audience can hopefully find some help with the Stripe billing platform. And I suggest speak to Steve, speak to, whoever you can, and I guess try and test it out. I realized I forgot some housekeeping apologies at the beginning. So in terms of Q&A, please, anyone in the audience, if you can, just use the tab in the browser and we can address that at the end. So just to help us with the flow. There's also a recording of this, which is going to be made available later on. Cool. Moving on to, I guess, one of the core topics that's come up is why are AI companies growing so fast? As we said, I had this open to the panel. So, amongst the three of you guys, please feel free to jump in. I'm going to hand it maybe to John if you want to start off and kind of go around the table.
Yeah, thanks, JP. It's like the way we see it is like a brand new technology that everybody basically in every company and also outside of the pure business sector wants to get their hands on, try it out and figure out exactly how is this technology like going to play out, how we're going to use it to make our lives easier, simpler, better, whether that is personal or in business. And that just creates like a huge influx of demand. And I think that's what we're all seeing is this sort of experimentation of, is everybody becoming engineers or are we moving into this new role? Is software becoming organic and intelligent? And these are some of the topics that we are discussing a lot with clients as well. And happily, we have clients who are also using tools like Bolt and Cursor and Lovable to create their own quote unquote products to make life easier for their specific circumstances. But yeah, curious how you look at this, Paul.
No, I would agree. I think apart from this, it's also about how they think about growth. I mean, traditionally companies start in one market, go to the next and like divide and conquer and go one by one. Now we see a lot of these companies, less than 20 employees, but already a global customer base. They basically from the start go straight global, which unlocks like a completely different growth pattern. And at the same time, this kind of growth that we see with like Lovable is really only possible with like a very strong self-service go-to-market motion, because it's like operationally impossible to build up a sales force or like a structure, even a sales team in that amount of time that can service like 50 to 100 million ARR in like in a matter of months. So it really needs a really strong self-service journey that works flawlessly to support this growth.
Yeah, no, I think I totally agree. I'm sure all of us here have played around with the tools and we are a perfect use case with consumers. Most of the time, consumers at home, consumers in the workforce. And there's this kind of very strange dynamic where this consumption pattern is also emerging in business use cases. And I haven't really seen that before so pervasively or so rapidly. So it's quite interesting.
Oh, Facebook for business.
Don't they already have that?
I tried that.
Yeah. But yeah, also like you said, John, like the technical entries, like entry points are so different. We're all engineers today. We all have the capacity to be engineers. And I don't know what that means for the engineers of the future. Keep doing what they're doing. But so it's been easier than ever to start coding and playing around with stuff. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think, for a lot of the people also in this room, you work with software day in and day out. It's basically all we do is work with laptops. So any sort of avenue that can make that easier, make that a bit more enjoyable, there's a big premium on that.
Yeah. Vibe accounting. Let's find out what that means. Let's do something there. Very cool. Let's move on. Topic number 2 is around operations. So specifically, I think what most of the audience is curious about, financial operations, AI, hypergrowth, all these sorts of things. I think maybe we turn the question over to Paul directly here, but how do traditional CFO processes break? Companies are growing this fast, and what are some of the learnings or takeaways you can share?
Sure. I mean, hypergrowth overall puts pressure on the whole organization. And it's not that finance is special. It's just one other part that's under a lot of pressure and breaks. I think if we think about processes, the way I experience this, I would split it into two categories. The ones where there's processes in place, they're just not efficient enough to scale at that pace, not automated enough. And then the other category is where you don't have any processes yet and you need to create something from scratch. And the first category is like, it's painful, but bearable for some time, which is more trivial things like expense management or invoicing, where you have a process in place and it works. It just doesn't keep up anymore. So you need to put it on more hours. It just gets tricky to keep up with the growth without being headcount linearly. But you have something in place. You have a baseline. You can cope with it for a while. And then the other part, which we were struggling with a lot more, is where you have no process in place, but you need something really quickly to support the business. In our case, this was geographical expansion. So, for example, already at seed stage, we started to have customers all over the world. So in France, Italy, UK, Nordics, US, UAE, and all that. And the business started to hire some people in those places. Initially, just like as contractors or URs, but ultimately we opened up entities. So at seed stage company, we had entities in the US as a holding, and then UK, France, Italy, UAE, which means our complexity on the finance side exploded. Good. So multi-currency, completely different tax systems, suddenly consolidation, lots of different local accountants. And that was really where I would say things broke and we really had to reinvent or think about how we do this. So like just the basic level accounting, when you do very fast geographic expansion, is definitely a huge challenge. I can go more into detail, but it's all about these questions like when you don't have anything in place, you want to internalize it, you want to externalize it, you want to have external accountants, you want to have it in-house. But if you want to have it in-house, you need to think about what are the tools and who are the people who are actually going to do this. Because if you have accounting, and anybody in the audience who has done accounting across many countries will know that the accounting knowledge is quite local. It's very hard to find somebody who can do accounting and taxes in Italy, France, and in Germany, because it's just inherently quite different, which would mean that ideally you need one person per country to do it. But as a young company, this just financially doesn't make sense to hire an accountant. And so you go towards outsourcing and then you look at like local experts. And then you have different options. You can go with a local accounting firm or like one of the big four or BDOs, who are however quite expensive. And if you look close, they actually also work locally. And then you are very reliant. There's a lot of coordination to be done with external people. You really depend on them. If they don't deliver on time, you don't have the numbers for your board. So externalizing is also not perfect. So I think this is where for us, it was really challenging and break. And on top of the people aspect, you have the tools. There's no one tool for Europe or the US that everybody is using. In the US, you've got QuickBooks and Xero. In Europe, Italy has their own solution. France has their own solution. Germany has their own standard. So it's very, very hard to consolidate and get everything in one system. And this is, I think, one of the bigger challenges. I think we're going to talk about tools later, but in terms of where things break, this was the one part. Another part which came from it, if you start employing people around the world, again, you have different options. That you're going to go with a local provider, or you want to have one central platform, something like Deal, for example. And for payroll, we said, okay, we want to have something central, and we thought the market is a bit further. We chose Deal, but also Deal has, let's say, its caveats. It's really great for freelancers and EORs, but if you run your actual payroll in the country through Deal, it is more like dealing with a lot of local teams again, because they've bought up lots of companies and it's very individual and lots of extra work, to be honest. So this is again, like payroll is something where something is breaking. And then last one is probably like the whole invoicing, revenue recognition, depending on your model, especially if you have something with credits or user space, then it gets very complicated very quickly. Fortunately, not the case for us. So I only had the geographically expansion challenges, but that's where I hear from other people that they're struggling a lot.
Yeah, plenty of good advice there, I think. Thanks, Paul. Steve, maybe just changing tact a little bit to you in terms of like, real-time revenue visibility. How is that happening? What are you seeing? How are you helping or seeing companies' forecasts? Like, what's the changing landscape here?
Yeah, it's kind of linked to the previous question in many ways. You're in this sort of world of rapid growth. You want to standardize the P&A process where you can do a long-range plan that feeds into an annual plan that then feeds into OKRs, whatever else, and how you manage the business and ultimately how you things like compensate your sales team, and everything's intrinsically linked. And then you're in this world where actually you're flying through forecasts in the space of a quarter because it's becoming very hard to predict. You've got new billing models that actually become much harder to predict as well. all of that causes pain to, I guess, that sort of CFO role where you want to be very focused around sort of decisions on capital allocation, treasury management, sort of forecasting your expenditure going forwards. Obviously, things cloud expenditure is inherently normally usage-based, but obviously you optimize that through things like savings plans, etc., that requires fixing. So all of that creates that volatility, limits your ability to build sort of strong planning processes into all of it. So you kind of want to move from maybe those longer term weekly or monthly monitoring of usage to, if anything, coming into daily based sort of monitoring of how volume is moving and sort of continuous insights into how things are trending. So you can start to make a lot more goal and short-term decision making than maybe you want to be doing in a more mature business, or one that's in a more traditional business model, or one that's maybe more SaaS priced where it's a bit more predictable. So yeah, I think unpredictability is the key name of the game there as well. Similarly, how do you start to track some more of the customer behaviors on that level? Are they expanding more? Are they buying more in terms of credits? Are they utilizing those credits as quickly as possible? Paul touched on this, but obviously RevRec becomes challenging. If you've got a large user buying a very large amount of credits, how do you then have the systems integration to measure as each credit is utilized? So all of that requires subsequent compute power and flowing through back-end systems to be able to make sure that you are tracking and working your accounting just as efficiently as well. I think the interesting thing talking to people in AI is even just, it's that understanding of TAM and almost SAM out of it as well. So actually, how big is this market? A lot of people just fundamentally don't know. I think you touched on this at the start, and a lot of people want to build TAM penetration and SAM penetration into their forecasting processes. And that's just it's just a gap at the moment in people's ability to say where they're going to get to.
So it's a tricky subject, TAM, SAM. I think we all like to think we all have huge markets. Maybe when you think about it, it's not as big as you think. Very cool. Maybe another set of questions is all around risk, managing risks, accelerating growth, these sorts of things. I think John's questions here that really well placed to answer. The first one is thinking about hurdles in a business. So, like how can you remove some hurdles? How can you scale efficiently? How can you manage risk in your organizations in this new world?
Yeah, I mean, Paul touched upon it earlier when it came to legal expansion and having many entities in different countries, which is also the hurdle that I saw firsthand in my first companies, where we scaled rapidly internationally, and then we had all of these legal entities, and then finance completely broke down. One of the things that gets us really excited is basically, like Paul mentioned, that it is very expensive to hire an expert in Italian, Portuguese, and English bookkeeping. But if you can actually hire, maybe not a person, but like an assistant that can help you do some of the pre-processing that you ultimately need. And I think this is actually where the future is heading. So we're working with a number of our clients that are basically implementing like accounting policies directly in the platform and using that to manage regulatory risk, but also keeping a consistent accounting policy across the entire group structure so that your month close is done similarly in Italy as it is in Denmark, for example. And I think we will see more and more of this all the way from the way that we do accounting to also business processes, approvals, is this one in line or not? Because your policies and your demands on compliance are just going to grow exponentially, and you need some sort of tooling that allows you to basically uplift 500 pages of PDF documentations and be able to run across all of those policies at every single transaction. And that's the future we're looking at.
I guess it's really like, human in the loop as much as we can, using these tools, these best of breed products to leverage up, to level up our organizations. I think that's what every finance leader and finance department should be thinking about. How do we get the most out of these different systems? I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to try and jump across, but we have a question here around scaling the CFO role. How can AI help CFOs increase overall effectiveness? That was one question that we had in advance. Throw it over to the panel. John, Paul, Steve, anything that you can think about helping some of the CFOs on the line?
I think overall, unfortunately, we're still quite early in the journey in terms of like where AI effectively in practice is helping a lot. I think there's a lot of potential, lots of stuff is happening. But as of now in practice, I think we need to differentiate a little bit of like where AI is already at the point where it's ready for user practice and really helpful. And I think LLMs are specifically strong around everything around text. So where we've been using it, or where I think it's already quite good to use, is around, for example, process documentation. Like what's your accounting handbook? You can just put in stuff and you don't even need a fancy tool. ChatGPT is just fine. Outline like what is your accounting process, documentation, knowledge transfer. If you have changes in your accounting team, I think it can be super helpful. also writing accounting memos, like how do you do revenue recognition? You want to send this to your auditor, like all these guidelines used to be huge documents. People spend like days, weeks on writing. I think this can be now quite automated by AI. Also for investor reporting or playing devil's advocates for like pitch decks, you upload your pitch decks, ask ChatGPT, what would investors like ask you and so on. I mean, if you're a big corporate, you might be a little bit concerned of where your data is going. You might need an enterprise license from ChatGPT, but genuinely, it's quite good to give feedback and ask questions. And less of a CFO topic, but in my case, also maybe others have it. In legal, I think LLM is also super strong. Contract reviews, contract writing, we've used it a lot. It has been extremely helpful. I think for the real accounting, there's still some challenges because when we think about it, accounting wants some deterministic calculations and all. So you want also consistency. Like if you add something up, it should always come out to the same. And in LLMs, you have fluctuations, which you don't want to have in accounting. Like if you set a rule, it's always applied the same way. You can't have like, sometimes if the prompt is a little bit different, this outcome versus that outcome. So I think in the actual calculations, AI still has a long way to go. But I think in the support part of it, there's already some tools out there. So for example, if we think about expense management and pre-accounting, like how to attribute, like you have a lot of invoices and so receipts coming in, what was spent on, let's say, lunches versus marketing and so on. And have this attribution, which usually the accountant does manually. He Googles like the cop finds out it's a restaurant or finds out it's a supplier. This can all be automated by AI. I think there's few tools that are out there. Like I think Ramp in the US is doing it quite well. And Rillet is starting it. I'm sure Light has something like that as well. With Jonathan, so there are some tools that I think are doing it quite okay. Also for like monthly closing, if you want to manage the process, like numeric, there's some task managers who give you a list of what you need to do and manage the process a bit. Flux analysis. These are some things where I think AI already today is really in practice and use, less on the actual like counting and calculations. But maybe Jonathan has news for us.
Yeah, I got jump in there as well to echo probably a couple of the ones you mentioned now. I know process documentation, for example, we record videos of a process and then use AI to convert that video into a process document. And then we use that process document in our offshoring processes to move things to our delivery center based out of India, for example. That's an excellent example of how it's actually made more productive. I also think you can kind of split it from that CFO role into those that are internally to finance and those that are within the, you see what I mean? So obviously for us, we have large tech teams. We now have a degree of sort of productivity and expectations into our tech teams as a result of leveraging AI into coding, for one. So where you see it, where it has existing strengths, we're looking at how we drive productivity there. Even within sales teams as well, particularly prospecting, rather than manual information gathering into prospects. Now, actually, there's the ability to fundamentally use AI to ask for basic levels of information into users, information into particular key stakeholders in businesses, and ground information to personalize more of that outreach as well. And then in finance, obviously, we're heavily reliant on things like SQL for pulling data, another area into coding where it drives a lot of productivity for us. It reduces some of the barriers to entry into a skill set that is probably historically not necessarily something expected of finance, but it has become almost over time, it's become a requirement very much within the role. So that reduces barriers to entry there. We're also using it more, particularly for automation in VBA, Python, some of the script stuff within Google as well. It's another tool that allows to reduce some of those barriers to entry there as well for people who don't necessarily have that skill set. Another one, Notebook LM, we leverage recording MBRs, another you can record into Notebook LM over time, board slides, recording over time. And then you can leverage AI to pull back insights or when you've referenced particular topics historically going back through documents rather than having to sift manually yourself. So just a few things that we're using it for.
Yeah, one of the things that we see, just to echo on Steve, is the hard thing from help you with the for accounting is basically like detailing out the context of what is that kind of policy and how should that be done. And this is typically where we see the most work with our clients, to really detailing that out and be able to upload that into a platform so you can actually see the benefit of a consistent application towards the transactions that are hitting your ledger, right? But then again, I think that the future is particularly bright where everybody basically can interact with the database, whether it's a ledger or not, and get the insights that they're looking for. And by basically, quote unquote, bypassing the SQL step and just writing in natural language and being able to derive the information that they need to be able to get.
Yeah. I think that all essentially the data BI interface is really fascinating. But I think, as you said, John, it's going to be a whole new world where anybody can query anything and get insights about their business and use that to improve their outcomes and improve revenue gen and cost centers. And there's a whole new world out there. I think the probabilistic versus deterministic uses of AI, I think, are still the challenges in the finance stack, but you have to assume over time that's going to get better. Like, if you're probabilistic, it is good enough. There's no difference between a 99.99999% probability and correct answer, right? So I think we have the belief that should be solved over time. Right now, we're just not quite there yet in terms of the accounting applications. We've got a few minutes left, so I'm going to switch over to the Q&A. We've got a few things here and there's a few votes. I think we've kind of touched on this a little bit. One of the main questions here is what tools some CFOs can upskill themselves with. I think we've touched on a few, but maybe just rapid fire. Each of you have, one or two that you would really recommend the audience experiment with. Please go for it. Maybe Paul, you had a nice list before you decided to leave us for a few minutes. So you tell us what you think.
I had a bit of internet issues here. Yeah, I think if you want to really do the consolidation and accounting, then probably you want to look at Relit or Light for like attribution of costs on an automatic way. I think Relit does it as well, but also Ramp, I've heard the US is quite good at it. I think for book closing, I've heard Numeric a lot for like managing that process and lists. And then something I haven't tried out myself, but I'm curious, and I've heard some other CFOs is on the invoicing part. It's called Tabs. It basically takes everything after the order form and automates it to cash collection, like the invoicing, chasing, and so on. I haven't checked it out myself, but that's what I've heard from friends that I make good experiences with. And apart from this, as I said, for all documentation, honestly, ChatGPT is probably the best.
I can just echo that. And a couple of the clients we're working with, we're basically seeing the VP of Finance and CFO building little applications directly in Lovable for various use cases, and then hooking that up directly with our API to gather different informations and get different inputs that they need from the rest of the business that is quite particular to their needs and industry, and just being able to feed that directly into the system in a way that makes sense for their business model. And I think it's a very, very interesting way where you can see small little modifications around the edges and being given the freedom to build your own, a little oil on the wheel, so to speak, just gives you that much more power as a finance organization.
I think the only thing I'd add on this as well is some of this is almost behavioral as well with leveraging AI. So there's lots of different tools, but some of it is just, it's something that a lot of people haven't used. They just need to build into their daily routine. So encouraging our teams to do hackathons as much as we can, to try and spend sort of an hour on a Friday, spending time sort of playing around with AI and the sort of functionality exists within it. We have Slack groups that are dedicated onto where other people have had success stories as well. I think there's some of this, the behavioral bits here as well, of just building it into part of your daily routine.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. Everybody should just be playing around. I constantly have a window open with either ChatGPT or Claude or something, and just be surprised at simple tasks that can really alleviate time pressure if you kind of test these tools out. There's a question here from Alex asking, will there be a consolidation of these tools? I can give my view on this, which is, I think we're already seeing a bit of a sprawl, a bit of an arms race. There's a real pressure because this velocity of innovation in this ecosystem is so rapid that we're seeing everybody trying to grab lands wherever they can. So some of the big horizontal players are shipping features in different verticals in different spaces. I think some of the vertical players are trying to offer more horizontal solutions. So I do think over the next few years, we're just going to see more and more tools, more proliferation. And I think the concept of feature uniqueness or features as a defensive moat is really evaporating. So I do think we'll see super apps emerging if we haven't already. ChatGPT, I think you could probably argue, is already a bit of a super app doing a bit of everything. But I do think we'll see an explosion, and then probably at some point in the future, there'll be a market share grab and consolidation. I don't know what you guys think, though.
I think the interesting question is, where is this all going to end up? Is it going to end up in hyper-personalization, and are we all going to get our own one-to-one software? Or is it going to end up with very few software vendors being able to offer you that, or somewhere in between, right? And that's the interesting part from where all of this is going.
I think consolidation will happen. It makes sense from a user perspective. I mean, a lot of it is about you want to have one tool where all the numbers are in and everything is already reconciliated and so on, and you don't want to switch between many tools. From a user's perspective, I think there is a need for it, and I guess the market is one.
One question directly at Steve. So what new finance technologies or tools found most effective for managing volatility and forecasting fast scaling AI startups?
Yeah, I don't think we necessarily have a perfect answer in some ways. The irony actually is you can actually use AI to help you predict where it can go. So we sort of use a lot of logarithmic trending, Serena modeling, etc., to forecast out. And actually something like that can often need sort of Python coding, etc., be more complicated to do. Now you get support both in the Python coding. Not only that, it's also previously something that might take a while to iterate on. You can now leverage AI to actually run that on a basis, on a daily basis, even more frequently for you. So while each forecast might end up being massively too low or too high, or probably too low in these cases, your ability to constantly iterate on it and update and refresh, leveraging AI, makes you more accurate over the long run. So I think you just have to adjust your time window over which you should be making some of your decisions and accept that, yeah, you need to use AI to refresh the forecast.
Another question here is specifically against sprawling of new roles in the CFO office. So given the surge in AI tools, the question here is, we've seen go-to-market engineers on the sales side. Are we going to see some new roles emerge on the finance side?
I think even some of the clients that we're working with are starting to hire quote unquote accounting engineers / financial engineers. Well, that sounds slightly different, right? But basically like looking for people that have a different skill set that can modify technology more to the needs of finance. And then at the same time, probably you might kind of need to hire some profiles that haven't done reconciliation day and night, but they have a different skill set that can help your companies. I think a lot of finance leaders are figuring out, okay, what is it actually that we're going to bring aboard into our organization, and how are we going to give them the right environment and framework for leveraging to the full extent possible this new technology in our company.
Yeah, I think it's quite a thin list of financial systems teams at Stripe, and I think that's where, if anything, we're just trying to build out skill sets within those teams. So they're obviously already there to build out tooling, and now it's adapting the tooling they might want that's previously done, be it sort of visualization through Tableau or something like that, to actually instead moving to AI. And I think then obviously the whole objective here is to try and make a lot of these things more accessible. So if anything, financial systems are building toolings, allowing sort of data access, visualization, standard language questioning to get answers quickly. You almost don't need the AI specific skill sets within finance, but fundamentally just a tooling existing within a finance organization that then makes it more accessible.
Fully agree. I also see as like a strong overlap between BI and finance. So a lot of just general KPIs from the company, not even like just accounting, and finding a tool to communicate it to the company. I see it more as a one thing and not just finance anymore.
Maybe one last question. Current best practices in exposing financial data. So is it finance systems? Do you set up a shared drive? Do you have a OneDrive? This is with regards to LLMs. So what do you recommend people use or do?
Yeah, I guess in our case, we've got enterprise grade pro versions of Gemini, etc. and things. So we've got Chinese models and things protecting our data sets within the company. So I just encourage that all of those companies have that ability to build to retain the privacy of your data. So that's obviously important to doing versus just general access versions of the systems. So more expensive from a licenses and credits wise, but obviously an important one with financial data to protect.
Sounds great. I think we maybe have, let me just check, time for one more. So here's another question actually in that same vein, just around implementing AI in tools. So somebody here's, I think Michael has said that they import data and prompt ChatGPT and have users converse with it, or is this something more sophisticated? I guess maybe that's a question around the interface approach to using essentially financial data. I don't know if you guys have any experience or if there's specific tools. We've given quite a few examples there. Feels like maybe a bit of both. Those, try some of the best tools, try some of the foundational models, and perhaps in the future, you'll see even more powerful BI interfaces with lots of the data, even at the database and data warehouse level.
Yeah, I think we tried out Omni recently. They have an interface where you can chat basically with the data and create charts and so on. Maybe that's relevant.
Awesome. Well, look, we've hit time. So thank you very much for everybody for joining today. Hopefully it was an interesting discussion. I think if there are any follow-ups, please feel free to reach out to CFO Connect. A huge thank you to all of us, not saying thank you to myself, but the other three of them. And yeah, there'll be a replay going on after this. And I guess we hope to see everybody at the next one. So thank you very much.
Thanks all.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, JP.
John.